When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about Daenerys' dream in A Storm of Swords, foreshadowing possibly the end of the series and the Great War with the others. This is a dream that I think really gets swept under the rug, especially when you think about all of the different prophecies and dreams and all the stuff that Daenerys has. This one really gets swept under the rug because in A Clash of Kings, we have the House of the Undying. Everybody remembers that because it foreshadows the series so well. It's one of the greatest chapters in the entire series. And then also, you have some of her stuff in A Dance with Dragons. Well, A Storm of Swords is a lot more about Daenerys conquering and all of that kind of stuff. But before Daenerys can conquer, she has to get the Unsullied. It's a really big part of Daenerys' plot in A Storm of Swords is getting the Unsullied to actually have an army, to have some sort of power. And it's a really big moment for Daenerys because up to this point, she's very inexperienced in leading an army or even trying to take over a city like she's trying to do with Astapor. So during the chapter in which Daenerys does get the Unsullied and sacks Astapor, there's a bit of a build up to that ending point of the chapter. It's very much different than the show, where the show spends a lot more time with, Daenerys actually getting the Unsullied. In the book, it's actually relatively quickly, but in this chapter, Daenerys is at night and she's having this dream, and she dreams of her on Drogon, well, presumably Drogon. It just says that she's on a dragon, and then she is basically dreaming of herself being Rhaegar, leading her forces against the usurper's forces on the Trident. But there is a twist, because as I'm going to talk about in this quote, there's a little bit more than just it being this kind of dreaming of Rhaegar and how she idolizes Rhaegar. There's a bit more to it, and it might be more than just a dream. So this is the quote, and then we'll discuss it. That night she dreamt that she was Rhaegar riding to the Trident, but she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurper's rebel host across the river, they were armored and all in ice. But she bathed them in dragon fire, and they melted away like dew, and turned the Trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew that she was dreaming, but another part exulted. This is how it was meant to be. The other was a nightmare, and I have only now awakened. But this isn't really where it ends, because followed directly up from this quote is that Quaithe arrives and reminds Daenerys of where she needs to go. The iconic quote of saying, if you want to go forward, you must go back, and the directional stuff, all that kind of idea. So it's interesting that Daenerys has this dream that seems very prophetic. It seems like a dragon dream almost. And then also you're visited with the magic of Quaithe that interrupts Daenerys as well. So there's a lot here that's very interesting, because I think this is not some random dream, even though there is hints that it could be, given that when we dream, we think about, things that are on our mind or we're worried about. And Daenerys right now is very anxious. She's struggling to sleep because she's worried about how Astapor, all that's going to go. She's trading Drogon to get the Unsullied, and then hoping the Unsullied will obey her to where she doesn't end up losing Drogon and takes Astapor, frees all the slaves. She very much reminisces with how Rhaegar must have felt before going into the Battle of the Trident with Robert. So as we get into this dream, a lot of it seems to parallel that, but for very different reasons. Whereas Rhaegar and Robert's Battle of the Trident had a really big impact and changed the entire fate of Westeros, I think Daenerys, when she comes over to Westeros and she has to fight the others, this will be the fight for really mankind. And I've always talked about the place that I think makes the most amount of sense for the story to have this climactic battle with the others is around the neck, around the Trident, because it makes sense where our characters are currently at in the story, just based upon we still have a whole northern plot with Stannis that needs to be resolved. The wall still has to come down, or the others need to get south of the wall. Daenerys, is going to take her a long amount of time before she even gets to Westeros, let alone learns of the threat and learns of characters like Jon and the rest of our crew, the Stark faction, all that kind of stuff. It makes sense that the North, for the most part, will fall by the time we really get a true battle against the others. It'll feel more like we're delaying the big battle. So, for instance, I've theorized that Stannis Baratheon is likely going to give his life defending the North, defending the living, being, the one true king, and dying likely to the others, and that's going to be his fate. Now, what I think is interesting, if we want to parallel this even further, if you then connect to the theory that Stannis will become kind of the figurehead, quote unquote, the show's Night King, I don't think Stannis, I want to point this out, I don't think Stannis is going to have all these big powers and all of that stuff, but I think Stannis will be viewed as like our figurehead of the others. Very different kind of than the show. The others, it was just the Night King is the only character. That is going to be kind of what I see maybe happening a little bit differently in the book, just based upon the fact that we've seen a prophecy of Stannis possibly being described as this shadowy, blue-eyed king, more or less. It makes a lot of sense when you tie it into this dream that Daenerys has. Daenerys says she's fighting the usurpers' rebels host across the river, but they weren't normal. They were armored all in ice. And think about the way the others are described. They're described as being armored in ice. If we even go a little bit further, Daenerys said specifically, the other was a nightmare. That language, I know she's referring to, okay, her real life is the real nightmare, and that this battle is really what she wishes she was doing, or all that kind of stuff. But the language there, I think, is very important. George could have said any number of different words, but he says the other. And so I think it's really meant to imply that the others are what she's fighting in this dream. She just doesn't know that. And so it would make even more sense if, well, the others were being led by Stannis Baratheon, somebody that directly opposed the Targaryen dynasty and helped, bring about their fall. It would be another parallel of the Targaryen faction going against, well, the Baratheon faction, albeit very different circumstances. Daenerys having a dragon and Stannis being part of the others, and maybe not even like having any type of thought process anymore. He's just a figurehead at this point. It's really interesting to try and theorize about that, because there's a lot here in only one single paragraph. Because even if you want to go further and you look at what Quaithe is talking about and things she's prophesizing to Daenerys, what if the idea of her needing to go back is not necessarily like what a lot of people maybe think about it as being she needs to go the opposite direction to get to where she needs to be? I've always took it a much more in the idea that Daenerys needs to go back to her past. And I think especially as we get into A Dance with Dragons, where A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys becomes less and less like a Targaryen. She's trying to, be part of the Marinese culture. She's locking up her dragons. She's lost, really, it feels like her connection with Drogon. She's not able to bond with him or control him. And she's starting to learn that once again at the end of the book and then into Winds of Winter. I think a lot of that will also then apply to Daenerys when, she was born, going back to Robert's Rebellion and the last dragon in Rhaegar, how most people believe him to be. Going back to that, because that is what it's all going to come down to once again, looking at why did Rhaegar do the things that he did, and that could also then lead her to figuring out Jon's parentage and all of that kind of surrounding stuff. So I think that in a lot of ways, I think Quaithe's monologue directly after the dream, it's not a coincidence. It's there for some reason. It's for us, the book readers, to figure that out. And I think it has a lot to do with that. And the shadow part of this, a lot of people have interpreted as she needs to go to Asshai. I don't think that is the case. And I think the idea of, and to touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow, has more to do with the battle for basically the light of this impending doom and darkness coming. Daenerys will have to try and defeat that to save the living so that she can try and live out her, life, have a home and feel comfortable, something she's never felt up to this point of her life. It's something that she's always trying to get to. And that's what I think the big point of this is. It's really just a foreshadow to the end of the story and what is coming for Daenerys. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think this is just a dream that's just okay, based on what's going on for Daenerys at the time, this is just what she's dreaming about? Or do you think it's really she's seeing a glimpse of the future? And especially paired with Quaithe, what do you think Quaithe's significance is to this moment? And so I thought this was a really fun topic. I know I had a couple people that commented on the post when I was asking what video you guys wanted to see. And a number of you guys, said, I don't even remember what you're talking about, or you don't remember, because it's one of those things where A Song of Ice and Fire is so large that things like this you might forget about. And especially when it's hidden in such a great chapter with Daenerys getting the Unsullied, it's not really at the front of your mind. Like, you could very easily skip this one little paragraph here and bam, you missed out on a huge, maybe foreshadowing moment for the series. Daenerys is really like that in a lot of ways, especially when you think about the House of the Undying, some of her stuff in Game of Thrones. She is a character that you really have to pay attention at times because George likes to drop a lot of subtle foreshadowing through her plotline. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.